So I'm going to talk about marketing transformation in the modern era. And I think some of these sort of challenges we've kind of surfaced and we've spoken about. And I think through the range of these challenges, someone here is going to probably have, some of these that apply to them and some that don't. But broadly, we sort of bucket these challenges in four areas. There's technological, things like, GAFAs, the acronym now for Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. So based on the Microsoft conversation earlier, maybe we should have put GAFAM, but another day. You might not have known, but GAFA now take 75% of all digital marketing spend globally. So 75% of all global marketing spend, digital spend goes through those four companies, which obviously gives them a disproportionate amount of power. Whatever they do, you have to react to, you have to try and predict what they're going to do, you have to be on top of their technologies in order to be able to better manage 75% of your typical marketing spend. And I think that applies probably at an even higher proportion when you're a smaller business and you can't diversify your channels too much. You've got to worry about and think about Web 3.0. Should you be in the metaverse? And obviously this, Lucy went over the metaverse a little while ago. At what point do you go in? How much investment? Cookie deprecation is a genuinely serious issue, which I don't see enough marketers taking particularly seriously, I have to say. We've been given an extension by Google for another year. But really, this should have been something that marketers were dealing with 3 years ago when they first heard about it. And in any case, if you know the nature of cookies well enough, you know that they're never really that trustworthy or reliable anyway in the first place. And also digitization. So we're seeing trends of what we call above the line marketing, TV, radio, etc., going online. So now, even out of home, your out of home posters are now digitized, so digital out of home. So everything is becoming digitized. There's also behavioral challenges that we need to think about. Things that the pandemic have sparked off, things that new generations have sparked off. So in terms of media consumption, I think we've all seen the charts of people having abandoned traditional channels and moving more digitally. And what we're actually seeing is that a lot of those behaviors are sticking around. They've now become permanent behaviors. Product research is an interesting thing. I think Amazon, I'm not sure on the statistic exactly, but Amazon is now one of the key places for product discovery. So whereas before people might have gone to Google and searched for electric heater, now they're going to Amazon and do that search to see what exists. So if you're not on Amazon, if you're not listed in Amazon and you sell product, then immediately you're at a huge disadvantage. There's also a huge amount of change in purchasing habits. I think now we're seeing in the UK just about 30%, so nearly a third of all purchases are taking place online. There's 1 in 3 purchases are taking place online. 2 years ago, that number was closer to 20%. So again, if you don't list online, if you don't have e-commerce capabilities, you're missing out on potentially 30% of your revenue. And that's increasing as well. That's increasing rapidly. For those who do sell products, retailers, point of sale is proliferating. Not very long ago, you only had to be 2 or 3 places and you can sell the majority of your stuff. You can capture the majority of your market. Now it's everywhere. It's on every influencer platform. It's on every social platform. Every tech platform now is developing some e-commerce capabilities and you have to be there. Obviously, we've spoken about the regulatory changes and they are, again, big changes. GDPR, privacy, consent, issues around identity. They're big issues and actually they're ongoing as well. I think there was something that the IAB created, which is called the Transparency and Consent Framework, which regulated this within programmatic tech. They've been fined for that because they did it incorrectly, and it's actually not private. So the Belgian Authority of Privacy, or something, I can't remember what they're called, they fined the IAB nearly £300,000, and they might change this framework, which means you need to be on top of what that change is at the end of this year. And there's obviously socioeconomic or geopolitical issues that we all know about. I mean, we don't have to spell these out, but they are serious issues. Ultimately, from a marketing perspective, and the way we see marketing is, we genuinely think that marketing is the engine of growth for business. But if something impacts your customers, it impacts you, it impacts your marketing. So all of these challenges, some have been around for a long time, some have just emerged. But actually, if we think about the last 2 years or 3 years, none of those 3 years have been normal compared to where we were 2017, 2018. We probably look back at those times now and think we had it easy then. That was, they were the golden years. The last 3 years have been very different to those years. I hazard that next year is going to be very different to these 3 years and those. And I bet you that the year after that is going to be different still. So change really is the new constant. And that's fairly cliched, but it genuinely is the case. So what are these headwinds? All of these headwinds, what do they do to marketing? So they make decision-making much quicker. You have to be in a position to be able to move quickly. Traditionally, even the TV, and I used to work in TV many, many years ago, we would book TV spots 3 to 6 months in advance. That doesn't happen anymore. You're not going to know what your schedule is going to be 6 months in advance anymore in marketing. You don't know where you're going to be in 6 months' time. We've got drastically higher data volumes. Now, that's true, but most people, A, aren't gathering any of that data, or B, are not using it well enough, which means that cross-functional agile teams become critical. One of my clients is actually paid in 2 different departments because it's a fairly siloed, it's a really big business, fairly siloed business. 2 different departments have gone out on their own data ventures and both bought these things called CDPs, customer data platforms, very expensive, could be up to maybe even £1 million a year. No one's talked to each other. No one knows that these 2 things sit in different divisions in the business, and neither of them are actually being used properly anyway. So we're helping them with that. And tightening privacy regulation as well. So no presentation is complete without a nice stock image. So really what this sort of ladders up to and comes down to is that finding growth in a more complex environment really is the challenge for marketers now. And as I say, we genuinely believe, and I genuinely believe, that marketing really is the growth engine of business. So how are marketers responding? What is the market doing? What are people doing to kind of keep up with this? Essentially, to try and transform marketing. So we hear the term marketing transformation. It's probably a term that's been around for a long time, but it's never been more relevant than now, I think. So how are people doing this, and what's the benefit of transforming marketing? I mean, firstly, what is transforming marketing? It's essentially making your marketing a little bit more mature, a little bit more relevant to right now, and a little bit more future-facing and able to deal with future. So there's 3 key benefits to marketing transformation. Obviously, aside from what I would genuinely say is survival potentially, it makes you better at dealing with change, and change is constant. You have to be able to deal with change, and I'll say this again, I'm amazed at the amount of, most of my customers have got divisional silo issues, because the way that the organizations were built and the way marketing was built 20, 30, 40 years ago wasn't designed to deal with change at the rapid pace that we get it now. So it allows you to become better at dealing with change. It also allows you to be better at marketing investment. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but first-party data is absolutely critical. First and zero-party data are absolutely critical. And they're actually, in my view, if you're not doing data well, 5, 10, 15 years from now, if your organization doesn't exist for whatever reason, it could well be the case because you didn't do data well. I genuinely believe that. But it also allows you to better service your customers. Personalization, knowing what your customers want, who they are, when to speak to them, when to sell to them, when to leave them alone, is all comes from transforming your marketing. There's definitely an appetite for change. Lots of marketers are trying to transform their marketing. 66% of brands are trying to reimagine their marketing models. So how do we do marketing? But there is a genuine shortage of skill set. 62% of brands really feel this, in particular in data and tech, and that is definitely the case. It's an emergent area which has emerged very quickly, and I don't think the talent pool has kind of caught up with that. And critically, and this is something we deal with all the time, 72% of brands feel that agencies are not adapting to programmatic. And actually, in truth, a lot of brands that I speak to, a lot of our customers just aren't happy with their agencies, full stop, in one way or another. And most brands don't have financial or data transparency. So in my previous life, I was a media auditor, and I saw all sorts of nefarious activities and the underbelly of the beast, as I've described it. And transparency definitely is not a key tenet of large-scale agencies servicing large-scale clients with large-scale budgets. So, marketing without data is like driving with your eyes closed. And I really like this quote because it actually speaks very much to where we are going with marketing, which is very much around marketing becoming a science. Now, marketing, of course, back in the day, if we think about Mad Men, etc., was very much an art, very much sort of creative. Creative is a critical part of marketing, and actually probably undervalued, to be honest, especially in the digital realm, where we see really bad creative being pumped out into social platforms, search platforms, display platforms, even video. For me, that's a bad habit, but we're there. But it is becoming more scientific, and we can use numbers to our advantage, really, to understand what's going on. Not all numbers are going to tell you what's going on, so you have to be a little bit discerning with what numbers you use, but a lot of numbers can tell you a story. So what are marketers actually doing to try and go from good to great, in some instances to go from average to better? We see lots and lots of different tactics, actually. I work with a lot of brands who do a number of different things, but all in the right sort of areas. So things like budget shifts, how do you diversify from GAFA? How do you test more creative assets? Personalization, focusing on personalization, which is obviously a very, very smart thing to do. Doubling down on measurement, how do we get better at measurement? So lots of brands are asking these questions. Exploring new channels. TikTok is obviously a massive thing that pretty much every brand now that I'm speaking to is like, well, can we get on there yet? Is it a good time to get onto TikTok? Testing new tech. Have anyone seen the latest Lumascape of Martech? It's got thousands of bits of tech on there that no one can possibly understand what they all do. Diving into more data, as I say, there's so much more data around right now. So how do you know which data is correct, which to actually look at? And then a lot of brands are actually focusing on media optimization, which again is a great tactic. How do you extract the most out of your media investments? How do you get the best ROI out of your media investments? Some brands, sadly, are doing nothing. And this is the sad reality that some are doing nothing. And I fear for their future. So really, it's a bit of a maze. It's very difficult. It's a difficult puzzle to crack, going from good to great. But the reality is that actually the majority of transformation projects fail. And I saw statistics somewhere. I'd question this a little bit, but it said something around the 90% mark of digital transformation or marketing transformation projects fail. That's a scary statistic and enough to put you off actually trying. But some of the interesting reasons for why they fail are not down to budget or time or resource. It's actually more around communication. It's more around buy-in. It's more around insufficient leadership, sort of backing and politics, etc., etc. So it's actually cultural issues that get in the way of transformation more often than not. And it's you see this all the time. Even again, some of my clients we're working with one part of the business that's looking to sort of enact some form of transformation, but actually they sit in a silo. They don't have view across all of marketing. No one has view over all of marketing. There isn't one place that does marketing within this organization. Every part of the business has their own marketing budgets, but they speak to the same customers. This is just how the company's developed, and they're trying to deal with it. But it's a cultural issue, and you're likely to come up against this all of the time. So suffice to say, it's a fairly complicated endeavor going from A to B. And as I say, more often than not, the tech part, the data part is actually usually the easier part to solve because that's zeros and ones, what's going on. So what is the solution? Well, actually, very simply in our world, we try very hard to help our clients to create structure. And building structure around marketing transformation is a great way to get buy-in, to help people understand what we're trying to achieve, where we're starting, where we're going to end. So how do we create structure? So CVE, we have a model that evaluates 6 pillars. Now, most consultancies and most companies and most brands that are doing transformation are going to have some form of categorization. So this is, these areas that we look at just essentially encapsulate the entire kind of landscape that we work with and the projects that our customers work around. Now, operating model, and we'll talk about these one by one. Operating model is where we suggest brands and marketers start. And these sound like very highbrow, massive organizational changes, but they don't need to be. Even smaller companies, even smaller businesses with smaller spends, you can still recognize efficiency if you understand exactly what you're doing and why, and then change to something that's a little bit more efficient, perhaps. And these don't all have to be done. Some of them are done, some of them are ready. Sometimes we modularize this stuff. If you think that you know exactly what you're doing from steps 1 to 3, you can just dive into the data. So you don't have to go from left to right, but we recommend that you have at least a view on what you're doing left to right. And I'll explain why we go left to right a little bit later. So let's talk to operating model. So really, operating model in the world of perhaps slightly bigger brands who have bigger budgets is rooted in whether you insource or whether you outsource. So do you run your media internally or do you give it to someone else to run? Now, that's a critical decision in marketing because it informs a lot of what else you do. Who do you need to have internally? How do you structure your data? Who do you hire? What do the teams look like? Who do people report into? The processes, etc., all stem from whether you have a team internally or whether you manage an agency. So this is obviously very, very important. In-housing is actually a big thing. I don't know if anyone here has any kind of in-housing project. So I think I saw a show of hands earlier of people who are in marketing. How many people here run some part of paid media internally? That's the majority of people. So the majority of people here run some part of media internally. It could be all, it could be some. But 1 in 3 global brands are leaning towards in-housing one way or another. Now, they do this for several reasons. The top reasons are cost efficiency. And in programmatic, actually, and I'm going to define programmatic as open exchange. So technically, social, search, everything is programmatic. That's run on a sort of a bidding system. But let's talk about programmatic as accessing sort of the broader landscape of websites, not closed environments like Facebook and Google, but open environments, newspaper websites, etc., audience targeting, that sort of thing. And the reason why you can see the most amount of cost efficiency with in-house and programmatic is because actually programmatic is still a little bit of the Wild West. And when you bring programmatic in-house, you can see genuinely what you're paying for your impressions and what the results are. So it's a lot easier to kind of monitor, if you like. Better audience targeting, you know your audience better than everyone else. You might be able to tie that back to some first-party data. And essentially, better audience targeting and cost efficiency is going to ultimately result in campaign effectiveness. Now, how do you think about in-housing? So we've got a number of frameworks and processes that we lean on in order to help us get work done. We have something called the 4 T's of in-housing. We broadly, not every in-housing project looks exactly like this, but broadly speaking, we start with the transformation piece. Why are you trying to in-house? What are you trying to achieve? Trying to reach organizational alignment. Then we look at technology. What is it that you need to have internally in order to be able to deliver the things that you're trying to deliver? Obviously, with that comes talent. So if you're going to have a CDP, for example, a customer data platform, what sorts of people do you need internally? Do you need data scientists? Do you need data engineers? That ties in with talent and obviously buying teams, etc., measurement. And something that we still haven't found a better word for, unfortunately, so we're sticking to TAB for now, which is basically costs. But we have to start with a T, of course. We can't use costs. So TAB essentially is, what is the cost of in-housing? What can you possibly recognize from that over what time period? The interesting thing about in-housing is a lot of brands, a lot of big brands at least, go into in-housing thinking they're gonna make cost savings. Over a 3 to 4 year period, they might, but the first 2 years look really bad on the balance sheet. So they get scared, they abort, go back to agency. But doing the numbers up front will allow you to know this. So, and then we sort of talk about strategy. So when we think about strategy, this is general marketing strategy, which everyone here is probably very, very strong at and far better than then what I can do, pest analysis, etc., 4Ps, 6Ps, 7Ps, however many they're up to at the moment. So, and there's also obviously here is considerations for the process, for the culture of the business, and I say culture is really, really important. How you work with, if you're going to have agency teams, how you break down silos. And importantly, I think also is the learning piece as well. When you take media internally, especially when you have it all internally, it becomes very difficult to bring in new ideas into the building unless you've got churn internally. When you've got smaller teams, you've got less churn. Obviously, you come to events like this, etc., but it's something that is worth thinking about and worth bearing in mind. Once you've got these sorts of ideas, and once you have essentially a plan on where you want to be, then you sort of move into something like data. So I can't stress this enough, and I've said this already. If you're not leaning into data, if you're not using data, you're missing a huge potential advantage. And if you're not grabbing that advantage, your competitors are. And if they're grabbing that advantage is actually just going to essentially, it's like compound interest. The more data they have, the better data they can yield, the better their operations are, the more you're going to struggle against them. So when we talk about data, actually, what does it help you do? So essentially, when we talk about zero and first-party data, and I would definitely say, understand what those things are: zero, first, second, third-party data. They're very straightforward. They're not that complicated. Zero-party data is essentially data that your customers have consented for. Yes, you can use my credit card details, and you can use my email address. First-party data can be things like, browsers on your site. You know what they're doing. They've logged in. You can see that they've gone to this page, looked at that product, and jumped out, spent that long on your site. Second-party data is essentially partner data. So if you have a partnership with another brand or a publisher, second-party data to you, because it's one step removed from where you are. Third-party data is essentially what cookies try and bring, what is on the open web. And in all honesty, third-party data has always been and always will be pretty shabby. And if you look at a lot of data testing around programmatic advertising, most third-party data that a lot of brands pay a lot of money for, actually, when they're trying to sort of really kind of audience target, is, to all intents and purposes, probabilistic and is no better at targeting your audience than a 50-50 chance. And for a number of reasons. And if you want to know more, come and find me and I'll tell you more about that. But understand your data. Understand what you want from your data as well. Data can give you, and especially first-party data, when third-party data goes away, because third-party cookies at least allow you to track your audience. When that stops, you're literally, if you don't have any first-party data, you're driving blind. You will not be able to measure your audiences. You'll not be able to measure conversions, where they're coming from. You'll be able to see what your marketing is doing. So you're literally going to be driving blind without first-party data, and it's a really big issue. So it allows you to personalize. Of course, if I know that this customer who's on my site last week and purchased something or browsed something, they might be prone to purchase now. You can send the right messaging. It helps retention, loyalty. It also helps you to build insights for your business as well. And obviously, as I say, measure the effectiveness of your advertising, and also monetize. If you've got good first-party data and a lot of it, someone's going to want to buy that from you. And actually, a lot of businesses, and we're working with a lot of businesses who are now building out essentially new revenue streams just because they know a lot about their customers. So there's lots of opportunity around data. And obviously, when you've decided what data you want, how much of it you want, and why and where, you then need to think about the technology setup. Now, when you think about technology setup, and the reason why we think this is important is because of that, the regulatory imperative now on brands to own data. Consent is actually falling on brands' and marketers' laps. So your customer's consent is your responsibility. So as long as that consent is your responsibility, that means their data is your ownership. And if you own the data, then I strongly recommend that you own the tech that data sits on in order to have control. So data can be complicated, but it can also be fairly straightforward. It doesn't need to be this complicated. And this is probably, more for enterprise level clients who are going to want things like data warehouses and CDPs or DMPs, lots of acronyms. We like to complicate things and make them sound really, really difficult. But all of this really just speaks to obtaining data, managing data, enriching data, and then just using data. And that's what That's what this is essentially. Then you have to think about your measurements. And actually, a question came up earlier today around measurements. When you work with agencies, typically what I see, and again back in my auditing days, agencies typically will report on essentially platform metrics, and in some circles we call them vanity metrics because they don't tell you a huge amount of truth, and it still leaves you a little bit short on, is this channel really working for me? Does this channel really tell me something about my business outcomes? And one of the things that we strongly believe in, which is why we set up CVE, is that the agency model, by and large, in a lot of areas, is actually broken. Agencies are remunerated on essentially how much money they spend because they take a share of spend, whereas businesses are not remunerated in that way. Businesses have a very different business model of making money to agencies. So when those two things don't speak together, then there's a lack of congruence there. So we really recommend owning at least some of the measurement and attribution framework. So what does that mean? Well, it means there are a number of different measurement tactics that you can do. It might be that the agencies are going to look at, CTR and CPA and CPCs and all those kind of, acronyms that come out of the platform. Great, that tells me one thing, but you might want to sort of try and get a little bit more sophisticated on that. When we run media for our clients, we always have some sort of testing on in the background. So we don't run media. When we build a media plan, we build a measurement plan to go with that media that is not just the platform metrics that we get. And we don't trust any one platform. We don't trust just Google because it's biased towards Google. We don't trust Facebook because it's biased towards Facebook. TikTok is biased towards TikTok. Of course it is. Google's not going to tell you Facebook was working better for conversions than Google was in a mix. So we build things like split testing or geo testing or lift tests. There's lots and lots of testing that you can do just to ascertain, is this thing really working for my business? And where possible, we always recommend that you sort of ladder this up into econometrics or media mix modeling. But again, this is for sort of larger budgets, which you don't really need to do, but it's a nice to have if you've got a spare couple of £100,000 lying around that you need to spend this year. And then we move across into media. And actually media, interestingly, so if we think back to those 6 pillars, we go left to right, we strongly recommend ownership of those 6 pillars is strongest from left to right. So media is really the only part of that sort of ecosystem that we believe is a lot more optional, ironically, in terms of ownership or outsourcing. Because once you've got your measurement in place and you own your measurement and you know what channels are doing for you, once you own your data, once you own your tech, someone can buy on your behalf. You'll be able to know if they're buying it well or not. And media takes actually a lot of workforce. It takes a lot of human resource. But really, and again, don't let charts like this put you off. A sort of a next generation kind of media planning system. Ideally, all this says is we're going to take data, we're going to use data to provide insights, to buy better, to build profiles, but none of this is possible without first-party data. So I just want to go back to the importance of first-party data. It really is critical because without first-party data, essentially, where you're going from is you're cutting all of that stuff on the left out, so you're not getting any data from any sources, so there's no input. There's literally just output. Here's a bunch of ads in a bunch of places, and then we'll see what happens to the bottom line. And the interesting thing about the media piece is that if we think back to that maze slide, most of the clients that I speak to, most of my customers start their in-housing or their transformation journey in media. They don't have that operating model bedded down. They don't have it agreed, signed off. They don't have the strategy. They don't have the data agreed. They don't know exactly what they're going to do with their data, where they're going to get it from. But they go directly into, okay, do you know what? I'm going to bring search in-house. I'm going to bring programmatic in. I'm going to hire a social person. Now I've got social in-house. So just some key takeaways. I can't stress this enough. Becoming data-driven is, in my view, critical for survival, genuinely, in a digital-first world, which we are in. Don't embark on in-housing without a plan. We see it so often. And again, we see it sit in silos and it's not expected. I go back to my client that's got 2 big CDPs costing probably £1.5 million a year that are not doing anything, sitting on 2 sides of the business. You only need 1 CDP. And even then, data sits here, data sits here, data sits there, and there's nothing connecting that data. And the third piece is organizational design and culture is as central as data and tech. So whereas data and tech is important, you can get those right on paper, but if you don't get them right in terms of the people around, in terms of the buy-in, then again, it's not going to work. Many times people spend a ton of money on specific tech, but they don't have the people to run that tech. So they've got to outsource people who are not invested, who don't really, who are sitting agency, don't know how to use the tech, using 20 to 30% of its capacity rather than actually extracting the real value out of it. And I think that's it. I don't even think I've got to, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.